Hello. We have some information that you might find interesting. This is a presentation by the Cincinnati Area Board of Realtors Realtor Lender Committee. We have three guests with us today, each talking from their own perspective. First of all, we have Nick Perino, a local title attorney. We have Steve Gaterman, a local mortgage lender, and Jack Strand, a local realtor. Each of us serve on the Realtor Lender Committee, and here's some information that I think you'll find helpful. So we're going to dive into our topics today, and we're going to talk about something that many of you may not even be aware of, and that's going to be the rule that comes up this next summer, probably in August. And it's going to be a rule that has to do with the HUD statements have to be complete at least 3 days before the closing. So I'm going to ask if we could, if Steve, you could talk about that. Just tell us what's coming up in this summer.
Sure, Jack. Next August, the 3-day requirement to review how a finished HUD prior to closing will be taking effect. And 3 days, as everyone knows, having the HUD out in today's environment is a very long time. So everyone is trying to prepare. Everyone is not sure that we'll be able to make that date and have it officially in place. But the theory is the settlement statement will be complete in its entirety and ready for closing. So if there's a minor change, there has to be a delay, and the update gets done, and then there's another waiting period. So it sounds very difficult to do at this point from today's perspective and what's going on right now, but all lenders are required to comply. So it'll be interesting to see if we can actually make that happen, Nick.
Absolutely. Does that, I think that means if the realtors are not completely finished negotiating a contract close to the end of the process, that this is going to cause a significant issue for them, because if they want to do the final walkthrough and they find out something's missing and make a change, that'll cause a delay in this HUD again, won't it?
Potentially it will. So any change to the HUD with regards to cost paid or obviously sales price, anything of that nature would delay the settlement statement and thus the closing.
Do you think that's going to include having the realtor for the seller say to the seller, instead of you pay for the home warranty, I'll pay for the home warranty, and basically switch who's making a payment on just the seller side? Because could that possibly add to the delay?
It could, yes. Any change to the HUD at all with regards to any numbers could cause a delay with the HUD being done and also delay the closing. So yeah, it could.
Okay, and that's something we're definitely not used to. That's going to be a significant change. So we're going to be working on this issue and trying to figure out how to prevent these last minute changes before the summer of next year.
I think what will happen is it'll cause everyone involved, both real estate agents, sellers, title companies, lenders, to really work ahead and make sure that everything gets done in advance as much as possible, instead of waiting till sometime the last minute to negotiate things. You know, things like walkthroughs, like you mentioned, appraisals. Everything needs to be done in advance. Not sure if it will cause contracts to be written for longer periods of time, but we definitely need to work ahead and work together to make this happen.
Okay, that's a big change.
Yeah.
Shifting gears just a little bit, but something that we've also seen a lot of over the last number of years, and that has to do with transferring of deeds, especially when you're dealing with REOs or with foreclosed properties. Nick, can you address that and some of the issues that have come up as a result?
Sure, that's been one of the largest changes in title that we've had, is the fact that there was a new regulation proposed and implemented which caused the recording of the deeds to be delayed by a significant amount of time. The deeds cannot be recorded until the confirmation is recorded, and they've changed how that's handled between the sheriff's office and the attorney's office in handling the foreclosure, and that has caused significant delay. What that has caused is people going to buy a bank-owned property, something the bank has bid on, has won the bid, they're going to have the property, and then they're immediately trying to sell it. Well, you would think if they're trying to sell it, they own it already. And this delay is causing these banks to be selling properties that they don't have in their name yet. It's not titled to them, and that title can be significantly delayed. As fast as contracts are being signed on these properties, it has happened over and over again that the banks are selling properties that they don't own yet. What that does is it causes a significant delay in the closing, because they can't sell it until they own it. And the customer doesn't necessarily understand that. It's going to be the realtor's job to check the record, make sure that the bank owns it, and if they don't own it, to inform the customer that there could be a significant delay between the time they sign this contract and the time they can actually close on it.
You were telling us of a story before we went on camera about one where there was as much as a 4 or 5 months delay. Can you tell us a quick version of that story?
We had an instance where the bank won the bid and they sold the property within 3 weeks. The confirmation can't even be recorded for 4 weeks. There's a minimum of 4 weeks until the bank can actually own the property. Well, the bank sold it, closed on it within 3 weeks. They didn't own it yet. I don't know how the closing happened, but the deed to the bank and the confirmation didn't get filed for 4 months after their bid. So these people had a home, lived in a home, were paying on a loan that they didn't own for 3.5 months after they bought it.
And there's a delay that's required, that's 30 days or 4 weeks. Just give the explanation of what that is.
Yeah, once somebody, anybody, the bank, the consumer, wins a bid in a share sale, there's a 30-day minimum requirement that the previous owner can come back and get the property back. They can reinstate the loan, they can get title back, and therefore a confirmation of sale cannot be recorded for a minimum of 30 days. Once the confirmation of sale is recorded, then the deed can be recorded. So you cannot own a property you bid on in a foreclosure sale for a minimum of 30 days. And because of these delays, you don't actually own it for much longer than 30 days now.
And Steve, we've got another change that's coming up this fall, and it has to do with rural housing loans. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, guaranteed rural housing program. The maps are changing, and they have been in the process of changing a couple different times. But as of right now, just recently, the new maps are actually on their website. When I say new maps, the new areas that properties are eligible to be financed with rural housing. So they actually, you have to be careful when you go on the website. They have old maps and new maps. So if you're looking for something that's going to be closing a little bit later in the year, be sure to look at the new maps. Now, the official date is October 1st is when the new maps are effective, and that's for loans that are actually approved. So basically, if there's something in process that needs to be still closing under the old maps, if they change, they need to get the process started and make sure they get approval and closing. So overall, there's been a little bit of a change, depends on the area. It's best to look at those maps if you have a listing to see if it's still eligible for rural housing. But there's a bit of a change effective this October.
Okay, there's another change coming up, Nick, and that has to do with registered land.
Registered land is, it looks like not long for this world in the local areas. Registered land has been terminated in all the surrounding counties, Butler County, Warren County, Claremont County, and now there's a proposal to have registered land disappear by in the first week of September. That may be delayed because there's a proposed lawsuit to prevent this from being terminated, but at this moment, it's proposed to be terminated at the beginning of September, which will be fantastic for those of us dealing with trusts or estates. If you have a property transferring out of a trust, if you have a property transferring out of an estate, there's a significant delay by the process of the registered land examiner being involved in that, and it's also a significant cost for the seller.
Thanks. Steve, tell us about the 3-day appraisal delay that is in effect already.
Yes, that was part of the Dodd-Frank ruling, and the CFPB, as we call it, is implementing that. I think the issue arose in years past that the consumer didn't see their appraisal until at closing, maybe after closing. So lenders are required to send a copy of the appraisal to the consumer, and they need, once they receive it, 3 full days to actually review that. And if there's any change to the appraisal, and they can be minor changes, such as addresses, not so much value, then there needs to be also a new appraisal issued, and also the consumer has that 3 days once received to be able to review that. The problem is at the end, let's say we have a value established, but there's something minor change, such as the seller has negotiated the inspection, and now they're going to pay some additional cost at closing. That also needs to be in the appraisal, and sometimes, I just had a situation last week where we weren't aware of that the seller was now going to pay an additional amount of money towards closing costs until the night before closing. That needs to be in the appraisal. It doesn't necessarily affect the value, but it needs to be in the appraisal along with all the correct information, and so that potentially can delay a closing. A consumer can waive the requirement and sign the document, say that they do not want to wait the 3 days to close if there is a change in the value or in the appraisal. But the point is that really working ahead, making sure the lender's aware of any changes to the contract price, of course, as well as the negotiations on cost.
Okay.
I think there's another point to that that's very important, and I think it's a current point, but I want to stress it. When there is any change in the contract, any addendum created for the contract, the lender needs to see it right away, because the lender may be required to give that to the appraiser, and the appraiser can then get his appraisal done and back out to the consumer as early as possible. So that it's very, very important that any change, any addendum gets sent to the lender immediately. I think a lot of people neglect to do that.
Yep, I would agree.
You know, one of the things that we've been seeing for a few years now, but our customers don't always seem to appreciate, is the increased need for documentation. From your smile, I know that you've dealt with that a few times. Tell us about that. Any new information there, or just some reminders that we can have for our clients?
Reminder, I guess, or the point would be prepared. Speak with your lender before you make an offer, get pre-qualified, of course, but even give them the documentation that they potentially need. Yes, there's been an additional scrutiny analysis of documentation that someone provides, and it's not even as much as a risk evaluation as much as a requirement to make sure the lenders have all the documentation to fully document the file. You know, we have to satisfy the new requirements on the ability to repay. That means looking at documents that show the income and assets to make sure that the ratio is in line and they qualify. And yes, everyone that's bought a house before has expressed a change of what's happening with documentation. But the key would be to just be prepared, work ahead, make sure you're getting your documents to the lender ahead of time, getting qualified ahead of time. There seems to be just a recent shift that there's a loosening a little bit of some of the document requirements, just a little bit, but not a tremendous amount. I think people get surprised because they're not aware of the changes, and they're looking at the house they bought 8 years ago, and it will, you know, feel and look the same way. But there's definitely a change. So I guess from agent's perspective, letting them know there is a change, prepare ahead of time, talk to your lender way in advance, I think is the best advice we can give.
Great, thank you, Steve. There are so many things that we need to be prepared for as realtors, and the best way to have a smooth transaction is to not be surprised by what's coming up and what may be required of our clients and our buyers and sellers. Do either of you have other issues that maybe we need to cover before we end our conversation today?
Let's see, just I think if it's a listing that an agent has, just asking a lot of the questions, a lot of what we talked about today with regards to the property and ownership. Is it, you know, is it in a probate status? Is the party going through a divorce? Maybe you're not even aware of that. We mentioned earlier, is there a private drive? If you have a private drive, they may require, lenders require some maintenance agreements. So just, I think asking the questions of the seller in regards to property, as you list that, I think will head off a lot of delays. I mean, I think, Nick, you see a lot of delays and things that pop up once you do a title search. Mm-hmm. And, you know, private drives is one, everyone just forgets about them. And maybe the owner even never remembered getting anything prior when they bought the house 10 years ago.
It wasn't as much of a requirement in the past, and therefore there are many instances where they don't exist today. So if you know there's a private drive, you may want to ask us to look for the private drive agreement right away, because if one doesn't exist, we can create it for the parties and get it signed before the closing.
Yeah, we've done it before.
Nick, maybe you could just end our discussion today on just a brief discussion on trusts and what some of the Fannie Mae guidelines are for trust, because trust can be a very useful tool to enable closing in many cases.
Correct. Trusts can be used. There's one specific example that trusts are extremely beneficial. There are a lot of people that want to close in trust just for estate planning purposes, but there are instances where you've got a divorcing couple and the divorce isn't final, and the one party is going to buy another home that they're going to live in, but the divorce isn't final, and the other spouse puts a little extra pressure on by saying they're not going to sign any documents. And if the other spouse doesn't want to sign, there's a way around that by creating a trust and doing the loan in trust. And the lender is going to require to see that trust because a specific trust has to be created for a loan. There's a whole bunch of requirements that that trust has to go through. It has to be a revocable trust. The grantor of the trust has to be one of the borrowers and one of the trustees. It has to have power to borrow money in the trust. There's a whole bunch of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac requirements that that trust goes through. It cannot just be their normal estate planning trust, even though some of those do qualify. So if you do have a spouse trying to buy a house, you can get rid of the pressure of the other spouse by closing in trust. Trusts have a lot of benefits. That's just one of them.
Well, thank you, Nick, and thank you, Steve, and thank you, Realtor, for listening. And we look forward to clear and clean transactions.